Susie, and my special guest is the executive producer of the Amanda show, Dan Schneider.
Hi.
It was very difficult, me facing my past behaviors. Embarrassing and that I regret.
Did she say nice things about me? Because I will tase her.
Oh. That's gonna get on TV.
I definitely owe some people a pretty strong apology.
I looked at all of them and I just said, how dare you?
Hey, also the network called and we're picked up for another season of
If you spent any time on YouTube at all for the last decade and a half, you've probably faced a bit of a crisis of faith when it comes to the things you loved as a child. Whether it's the exposure of once beloved YouTubers, the arrests of your favorite celebrities for truly heinous crimes, or even just the revelation that some people aren't as nice as they appear to be, YouTube is the place where illusions of innocence come to die. And there's probably nobody whose illusion of innocence died a deader death than Nickelodeon super producer Dan Schneider. Now, you probably know the story of Dirty Dan by now. Once hungry teen actor who gets handed the keys to the kingdom at children's television network Nickelodeon and develops a show called All That, pitched as SNL for kids, and ends up creating countless iconic stars like Amanda Bynes, Drake Bell, Kenan Thompson, Jamie Lynn Spears, Ariana Grande, Jeanette McCurdy, Kel Mitchell, and honestly far too many others to even name. A man whose entire brand could once be described as a king and queen maker for the tween market, depicted by many speaking about him now as untouchable in his prime. That all changed, and I'm pretty sure a big reason it did was because of the conversation that erupted on YouTube when people started to notice that Dan Schneider was a little sus. Video after video released about Dan, followed by mainstream media reports of Dan's alleged and even some confirmed misconduct that culminated in Nickelodeon parting ways with Dan on March 26, 2018. Parting ways. Conversation around Dan's alleged transgressions never truly ceased, however, which culminated in the release of a 4-part investigative docuseries into the darker side of Nickelodeon. This series is quiet on set, The Dark Side of Kids TV, and released nearly 6 years after Dan was let go from Nickelodeon on the streaming platform Max. And even though a lot of the information about Dan in particular had already been dissected by YouTube at large, it created the single biggest platform for Dan's sus behavior yet, which led to something nobody saw coming. Dan Schneider sitting down for an interview to address the many allegations made against him. And fellow Suspirians, let me be the first to tell you, this interview is bad. it's not, I don't even consider it an interview. And the many child stars who have spoken out against him are understandably not happy. So let's dip a toe in the cesspool and see if Dan's already a drowning, or if we need to high five doo-doo Dan when he reaches up for help. But first, oh hi, hello, it's Swoop, and welcome to the cesspool, the place where everything and everyone is sus, maybe even us. Come on in, the water's fine. Welcome back, Suspirians. Okay, oh wait, hold up for a second. Hello, all regular Swoop here, jumping in from the future. You may have noticed something a little different going on today. So this video was actually originally meant to go up on my second channel, which is called Swoop 2, T-O-O, which is why you're seeing the purple lavender hair. Okay, that is my Swoop 2 hair. So last week I posted the Amanda Bynes documentary here, and as I was editing this Dan Schneider piece and seeing all of your comments requesting a Dan doc, I was like, I feel like it really just belongs here on the main channel. And this will give you an example of what my videos are like over there. So the format is a little more relaxed, and we dip into what I call the sus pool. So it's not meant to be a full Swoop extensive deep dive, but we will be fact checking and try to amplify some of the voices of people who came forward. And I just want to say this before I turn purple. I think while Dan Schneider is a big part of the story, he's still just one part of a very disturbing, broader story around Nickelodeon as a whole. So let me know in the comments if you still want me to do a full extensive Nickelodeon deep dive, and I will see what I can do. Okay, sidebar over, so let's make this official. And welcome to the cesspool. We have another absolutely ridiculous interview to analyze. Now, as always, if you want to join our cesspool community, all are welcome. I don't know why I did that, but we're just gonna go with that. And you can grab your exclusive Valid Ribcage and Valid Social Club apparel from the Petty University shop, linked below as always. Okay, we are gonna dive into Dan and this interview, but first I have a question for you. What is your most favorite smell memory? So I remember the first perfume that I ever smelled. It was the scent that my mom wore when I was a kid, and it came in this like beautiful vintage glass vessel, and she would apply just like a few drops, you know, with her finger to her wrist and to her neck. And I used to watch her and just think how beautiful she is. The perfume was like this very like warm vanilla amber, and is the reason that I gravitate to those scents today, to bring back that feeling that, you know, like everything will be okay. You know how mom does, everything is gonna be okay. Which is exactly why I love Scentbird, which introduces me to a whole world of fragrances to explore as I build more of these memories. So huge thank you to Scentbird for supporting this channel and sponsoring this video. I have been wearing scents from Scentbird for years now. So Scentbird is a fragrance subscription service that lets you choose a new designer fragrance every month, making your personal fragrance journey truly special. They have perfumes, colognes, and lots of unisex options. And Scentbird carries luxury brands like Prada, Gucci, Versace, and niche brands like Skylar, Heretic, and Confessions of a Rebel. So you get to choose what you want, so there are no surprises. And with each fragrance, you get this beautiful and huge vessel. That's a full 30-day supply so that you can wear them all month long and switch up your scent the next month, or grab a full-size bottle of the one that you love. And y'all already know, okay? Y'all already know there is a discount just for you. You can use my code PETTY for 55% off at Scentbird. It's just a little over $7 for your first month, available in the US and Canada. So this month I received Versace Crystal Noir. Oh, that smells so good. This is like this gorgeous, sensual, delicate fragrance, kind of like my mom's. It has some warm amber and a musky base and ginger and gardenia. I also got the 7 Virtues Coconut Sun. Oh my gosh, that is delicious. Like, I literally want to eat this. This is kind of giving like a dreamy holiday in a bottle. It has notes of coconut water, fresh citrus, vanilla, and sea salt. I also got Veronique Gabai Sexy Garagoué. Ooh, and I'm telling y'all right now, layer this one with the Versace, thank me later. So yes, friends, join me on your self-care fragrance journey and recapture the memories and create some new ones that make you feel your best with Scentbird, and use code PETTY for 55% off and treat yourself, honey. You deserve it. Okay, it's time to dip in to the cesspool, and back to the purple we go. Now, before we dive into the Dan interview, we probably need a bit of context on why Dan is even speaking out after this docuseries in the first place. The first thing people really called Dan Schneider out on was the countless examples of overtly SEOalized content written to be formed by children and released to an audience of children. You know, best of both worlds. The earliest public questions about these allegations can be found on 4chan and in early YouTube videos as far back as 2010. But reports also emerged of his extreme temper on set, with him blowing up at his adult team and the child actors he employed. This also brought to light a gender discrimination lawsuit filed against Dan's production company all the way back in the year 2000, one that ended in an undisclosed settlement. Conversation about all of this brought to light the absolutely endless paper trail of his well-documented but also completely alleged and therefore rumored predilection for feet. Yeah, feet, feetsies, the things at the bottom of legs, yeah, those. Feet. He has a predilection for feet, allegedly, especially young girls' feet, so...
In. Out.
There we go.
Hold big toe in your mouth. Check this out.
Countless videos were released about Dan and Nickelodeon alleging to expose his disturbing content and alleged criminal activities. Now, to be clear, aside from workplace harassment, which indeed resulted in a lawsuit, anything criminal against Dan has always been alleged, and in some cases outright denied by people close to him, including some of his stars. But even though there are many things Dan has done that aren't necessarily criminal, that doesn't mean they're right. Now, after YouTube did its thing, even some of Dan's former stars spoke out against him, like Jeanette McCurdy, who I previously covered also in a documentary. This was then followed by even more crew speaking out about everything from gender discrimination to harassment to outright racism, because God forbid we have a story without that, which of course all comes together in the Max series Quiet on Set. Now, the entire series isn't just about Dan Schneider, but he's a central figure throughout most of its 4 episodes. For instance, it explores Dan's symbiotic and potentially inappropriate relationship with Amanda Bynes, which ended up becoming completely fractured after an incident where Amanda ran away from home and tried to live with Dan Diddy Dan Dan. It also explores incredibly sexualized sketches on all of his shows, such as a bit when underage Jamie Lynn Spears gets goo squirted on her face, a bit that Alexa Nichols admits has essentially traumatized her due to a male co-star describing it resembling, I'm sure you can fill in the blank, right? Probably the most damning section of the documentary against Dan has to do with the various ways in which he fostered an incredibly unsafe working environment for kids, with multiple Black actors being forced to wear spandex or costume pieces resembling genitalia, all while feeling secluded from interactions with Dan. Many former actors came forward to talk about On Air Dare, a segment in All That can generously be called Fear Factor for Kids, where kids would sit in, like a tub of worms or eat a live scorpion or cover themselves in peanut butter for dogs to lick it off them. That's all on top of the unsafe working environment he fostered for adults, which got his company sued back in 2000. So winner, dinner, Dan Noodle Man. Sorry, y'all know I got a little thing called Petty University. Petty is my coping mechanism. I don't have a lot of, I don't like Dan, okay? I'm trying to see past that, but let's just get it clear. I have a little trouble calling him by his government name all the time just because. So anyways, interestingly, episode 3 of the series contains the most disturbing allegations that weren't publicly known previously, but they're not made against Dan. They're made against a former Nickelodeon dialogue coach, Brian Peck, a man who was convicted of countless disturbing crimes against a previously undisclosed minor, who Quiet on Set reveals for the first time publicly is none other than Drake Bell. Now, two things. Number one, there's quite a bit we can talk about when it comes to Drake Bell and his own set of allegations. This is true, or at least alleged in some cases, and feel free to pause the screen on any of these screenshots from an article in People about just one of the stories. But for the time being, this cesspool belongs to Dan Schneider and how Drake Bell pertains to him directly. And number 2, I highly recommend watching episode 3 of Quiet on Set for the story straight from Drake's mouth. But to briefly summarize it, Drake was an up-and-coming child star who found himself in a bit of an inappropriate friendship with Brian that led to Brian essentially taking on a bit of a surrogate father role in his life by taking him to auditions, and most disturbingly, having him sleep at his house for years. Where that truly gets disturbing is when Drake states that Brian repeatedly crossed the line in extensive and brutal ways that Drake describes by saying something like, "Imagine the absolute worst kind of abuses you can endure, and he did them to me." And when the case went to trial, it became even more heartbreaking when he noticed that Brian's entire side of the courtroom was filled with countless celebrities vouching for Brian, including James Marsden, Boy Meets World actors Will Friedle and Ryder Strong, and Taran Killam, a man who at 19 dated a 15-year-old Amanda Bynes. Even worse, all of these people wrote glowing letters to the court in support of Brian. 41 in total. What the fuck is going on, people? I don't understand. How in the hell, why do adults do this? The Ashton Kutcher letter, just because you had a good experience doesn't mean everyone else did, for fiddle sake anyways. But following the release of this series, Dan sat down for an interview, and I'm sorry. I'm not gonna ever call it anything other than an interview with my air quotes, because I, as an interviewer, a person who conducts interviews for documentaries and things, there's just no world where I would call this a legitimate interview. But anyways, maybe I'm biased. I don't know. Dan sat down for an interview that was featured on The Hollywood Reporter, featured there to offer his side of things, to apologize when necessary, deny what he calls misinformation, and, well, I'll let you see it for yourself.
Hey, it's Boogie. I played T-Bo on Nickelodeon's iCarly.
So that's Boogie from iCarly interviewing Dan Schneider, LOL. And even more interestingly, if you click through to where the video is hosted, this is actually an interview facilitated by Dan Schneider for Dan Schneider's personal YouTube page. What the flying pig shit are we doing, people? Okay, we're off to a great start, okay, through the lens of objectivity, folks. Of course, you know, I'm not being objective here because I don't need to be. Yeah. Anyways.
I got a chance to watch the Quiet on Set program, and I reached out to Dan to see if it was something that he'd be willing to discuss. I'm pleased to say that he said yes. Dan, how are you?
I'm sorry. Here, let him speak.
I'm okay. I really appreciate you reaching out and giving me the opportunity to talk to you about what we saw over the last 2 nights.
I'm really glad you're here because I believe this is important.
For sure.
Okay, I'm just gonna say this right now. Nothing about this feels real to me. This does not feel like an actual interview, nor do I believe that in the short period of time between Quiet on Set coming out, that they just we're like, oh, let's just quickly do an interview. I think this was very planned with both of them. I just don't believe this.
We've got a lot of things to unpack. But before I dive into my list of topics that I'd like to discuss, is there anything you'd like to start off with?
Absolutely. Watching over the past 2 nights was very difficult. Me facing my past behaviors, some of which are embarrassing and that I regret. And I definitely owe some people a pretty strong apology.
I'm sorry, this is so staged. So we start off at a relatively neutral place, even though Boogie saying he reached out to Dan seems a little sus, given this is on Dan's own platform. I mean, I shouldn't even have to point this out, diabolical Dan, but Boogie stresses the situation is serious. It's so serious. Which it is. Wish you would have handled it that way. I'm just sorry, Dan. So Dan agrees and he promises apologies. Cute. I mean, I'm sure that Dan will directly apologize to, I don't know, Jeanette McCurdy, Alexa Nicholas, Brian Hearne, Christy Stratton, Karen Finley Thompson, Jenny Kilgren, Amanda Bynes. I mean, I could keep going, but let's just keep watching instead.
Let's talk about the massages.
Okay.
Watching the content yesterday, it was disturbing.
It was wrong. It was wrong that I ever put anybody in that position. It was the wrong thing to do. I'd never do it today. I'm embarrassed that I did it then. I apologize to anybody that I ever put in that situation. And even additionally, I apologize to the people who were walking around Video Village or wherever they happened, because there were lots of people there who witnessed it who also may have felt uncomfortable.
Now, at first glance, this seems fine until you realize a few things. First of all, Dan is staging this, theoretically. He's not naming any names, and he's not providing any corroboration on direct apologies made to anybody he did this to. In Quiet on Set, a number of producers and writers are alleged to have rubbed Dan's shoulders, but it's also alleged that he had an underage Amanda Bynes do this too. So Dan can claim to be sorry, but we'll need a little bit more here. Some specifics would be really nice when you're presenting this as like your grand apology and accountability thing.
Dan, talk to me about the writer's room. From what I saw, not cool.
No, and I don't mean to cut you off, but if I can cut right to the chase, let me just say, no writer should ever feel uncomfortable in any writer's room, ever, period, the end, no excuses. Most TV writers, comedy writers have been in writers' rooms, and they are aware that a lot of times there are inappropriate jokes made and inappropriate topics come up. I participated in that, especially when I was leading the room. It embarrasses me. I shouldn't have done it. And I can tell you why it hurts really bad for me.
Did this man, in his apology video, where he's not giving any specifics at all, none, no names, nothing, did this man really just say, let me tell you what hurts me? Did this man, in his apology tour interview thing, really make this about him as a victim, where he's now going to share why it hurts him? That's fucking great, Dan. So just amazing. I love it so much. Love that for you. Okay, let's keep going.
In the writer's room, there's no doubt that sometimes those jokes went beyond the pale, and I said things that went too far, or made practical jokes that went too far, and that was wrong. And that was because, I was an inexperienced producer. I was immature. Wouldn't happen today, but I'm just really sorry it happened.
Yeah. Now, we know you've had a lot of success over 2 decades.
What tells me that this isn't a real interview is that Boogie never follows up his questions. And that is just not what you do as an interviewer when you are talking about especially things that are this sensitive and this important in that it has harmed a lot of people. You don't just hear their answer and then say, yeah, okay, back to my cards. If this is supposed to be about accountability, you actually push in and dig in more to get that accountability from them. And that's not what's happening here. But something on the surface, I'll give Dan the benefit that these words are true. In a writer's room, the envelope is often pushed as far as it can be, right? It's good that Dan's saying this. However, it's worth noting a bit of context to the apology Dan is making about these jokes. Like when he flippantly asked one writer in the middle of her pitch, allegedly, whether she used to do phone, S-E-X, and when she tried to get back on track, because why the hell are you asking that question? He kept fixating on the idea of her doing phone S. Winner. Or how about when writer Christy Stratton was pitching an idea and Dan told her to, quote, lean over the table and tell the story like you were being harmed sexually from behind. This particular joke is so traumatizing for Christy, and of course, that when producers of Quiet on set asked her about it, she became visibly shaken and refused to comment. I don't even blame her. This is just awful. It's also worth noting that Dan Schneider was born in 1964, according to the Internet Movie Database, and Christy and Jenny worked for Dan from 99 to 2000 when Dan was 33 to 34 years old and had been running and writing for shows for over half a decade. So Dan knew better, in my opinion. He just didn't give a shit.
Thousands of people have worked with you, for you.
Okay.
Let's speak directly to the people who did not have a good experience with you.
Okay, I would like to speak to those people because I hate that anybody worked for me and didn't have a good time. You know me, you've been on my sets.
Do you see what he does there? And that's why he chose Boogie, right? Boogie it seems to be, I guess, I don't know if he's an ally for Dan, but he probably is because he was willing to do this. He needed someone sitting across from him where he could be like, you know me. And then Boogie gets the smile he needs somebody to co-sign his behavior and his existence and somebody who was on set with him. That's why he chose Boogie to do this interview so that he could get the co-sign of, you know me, you know my heart, you know that I wouldn't be this, I'm not this guy. And
look, I've had some employees that have worked for me for 10 years, some more than 20 years, who would work with me again, but not everybody. There's still a significant number that didn't have a great time working for me, so my batting average isn't nearly high enough in that area. And the way they wouldn't get the best of me is that I would let the pressure of doing 40 or even more episodes per year, I would let that pressure get to me, which a good boss should never, ever do.
Was there specific things that you were doing?
Sure. I would snap at people sometimes. I would be snarky when I could have given them a nicer answer. I would not give people the time that they needed. I would be in too big a hurry to get on to the next thing I had to do.
You see what he does here when he's listing out the bad things that he does. They're very simplistic things, like I was a little, what does he say? Like too ambitious, or I was, I just snapped at people because I was taking on these 40 episodes. The things that he's saying he did, that he's admitting to doing, are very generic things that one would anticipate and expect to happen from most bosses from time to time. Who hasn't had a boss that snapped, at somebody a bit rudely, right? These are just common things. Even people snap at their own family members at home. Like people snap. These are all softball things that he could admit to, while it sounds like he's listed a whole bunch of things, but he leaves out the very, very, very big things.
Watching that show, there were so many times I wanted to pick up a phone and call some of those people and say, I'm so sorry, and let's talk about it, and I wish you'd had a better time, and I wish I could have shown you a better experience.
Yeah.
One of the most interesting things about examining Dan Schneider under our wee little, cesspool microscope is figuring out who these people are who won't work with him again. Women of color. Many black men, especially from early on in all that. Also queer people, and to a lesser extent, allies who empathize with them. Now, to date, any apology Dan has made has been just generalized, with one notable exception coming up later in this interview. Dan exploited children and then very dryly apologized in a video on his own YouTube page, showing no real remorse, but hoping, hey guys, this'll do the job, right? What if I just stage an interview where the interviewer is so not in on making sure that I'm prepped, primed, and T-balling me compliments so that I can Sorry. Let me stay on task. He says he wishes he picked up the phone and apologized. What stopping you? Nothing. So good shit, Diaper Dan, but we're still not even at the stranger parts.
You've written hundreds of episodes. Thousands of jokes have been told.
Yeah.
But currently where we are, some people think that some of those jokes are inappropriate for children. What do you think of that?
This is just like a really bad question. As a reminder, some of the jokes some people find inappropriate are, and I won't get graphic, a cum shot, a scene where a pickle is stuck through a hole that Ray Romano groans while he eats, countless liquids sprayed provocatively on children's faces, a character whose name is Penelope Taint.
My name is Penelope Taint. I just happen to be Amanda's number.
Which, yes, is a reference to the human body part. I mean, I'm remembering Ariana Grande with the potato. There are Jeanette McCurdy. The list goes on and on. Some people don't find that inappropriate. It just is.
These jokes that you're speaking of, that the show covered over the past 2 nights, every one of those jokes was written for a kid audience because kids thought they were funny.
Sorry, we needed a little bit of the people's eyebrow there.
Looking back at them 20 years later through their lens, and they're looking at them and they're saying, I don't think that's appropriate for a kid's show. And I have no problem with that. If that's how anyone feels, let's cut those jokes out of the show. Just like I would have done 20 years ago or 25 years ago. I cut it. I want my shows to be popular. I want everyone to like. The more people who like the shows, the happier I am.
Yeah.
He says, I want this to be popular.
I want my shows to be popular. I want everyone to like. The more people who like the shows, the happier I am.
Yeah.
This statement doesn't actually imply care about the harm committed to children and the context exposed to children. He just wants it to be popular. So what do I got to do to make it popular? You guys want me to get rid of the jokes or whatever? Okay, fine. I'll just get it. You know what I mean? That's the vibe it's giving.
I want to give you an opportunity to kind of elaborate on something.
Okay.
The thought process from the series is you had the power to just write a joke, and no matter what, it's going on TV. You just had that type of power. Is that true?
The notion that I had the power to just produce whatever I wanted and have it air is completely false. We had executives in LA. We had executives in New York.
So 2 coasts.
2 coasts
Okay.
of approval,
coasts.
Yes. And by the way, approval at every stage, really.
Okay.
And I'm talking about wardrobe, I'm talking about makeup, sound, sets, dialogue, jokes, everything. And we're also shooting it in front of all sorts of adults and caregivers and the set teacher and the families. Everybody's watching it. And if anybody had said anything hey, we don't like that. That's not appropriate. Then it would have been cut out.
One of the things Quiet on Set goes over is that parents were often seen but not heard, meaning that per the dynamics established on set, nobody felt like they could speak up. An example is even seen when Brian Hearne's mother, who Brian actively hid information from because he knew she would get upset. Nobody, especially the kids who are kids, Dan, wanted to rock the boat. We even see examples of what happens when you do speak up in Drake Bell's story. When his dad spoke up, he got shunned, accused of being a homophobe, and let go from his position as Drake's manager. Am I living in another dimension, or is this logical thinking? Again, when he's like, people are thinking it's wrong now. It's like, no, but it was wrong then. It's kind of like when people are like with racist things. They're like, oh, but it was a different time. No, it wasn't. It wasn't a different time. It was just easier for you to get away with it.
Now, I'm gonna push back a little bit because the series painted you in this way that you were just the guy that was doing what he wanted, and people were afraid to confront you about things. So just humor me, say that was the case. What would have been the ultimate way to...
Okay, if nobody on the set, if all of the dozens and dozens of adults that were on the set, if they didn't say anything, if my bosses said, if they insisted, you gotta make a change here, you gotta cut that, I had to do it, I had no choice.
Got it.
Got it? Got it? Got it? Got it? Come on, Boogie, okay, if you want me to believe that this is a real interview, like that wasn't an answer, my dude. It was literally him repeating what he just said in another way. Seriously, I'm just like, at this point, Dan, you know what? Dan needs to sit in a 6-hour Swoop interview exclusive. 6 with Swoop, okay? We're branding it because for some reason, a lot of my interviews seem to go 6 hours, okay? I have some questions, handy dandy Dan. Anyways, now I do not doubt Dan and his writers pitched jokes that went too far and got cut. I also know for a fact that they got away with a lot more than they should have, and passing the blame off to Nickelodeon simply isn't enough. I mean, for sake, look at the clip from another show on Nickelodeon Dan didn't work on.
Oh baby, oh baby, oh baby. Rocco? Mrs. Bighead? Well, Spunky.
Yes, that's Rocco running a phone S hotline. Yes, it says, be naughty on the wall. No, I have no idea how that made it to air, and it's far from the only example you'll find in old Nickelodeon shows, Dan Schneider or not. The failing does come down on Nickelodeon as a whole, but Dan, man, you can't keep skirting accountability for your part in it. I highly doubt you didn't know what you were doing, dude.
Series highlight 2 former writers viewers, 2 women, who spoke about a wage discrepancy. Now, I know that you don't divvy out salaries. Talk to me about that part.
Well, you're correct. I have nothing to do with paying writers. I never have. I've never made a writer's deal. And of all the writers I've been in a writer's room with, I never even knew how much most of them were getting paid.
Yeah, but we saw these 2 women who were writers for you sharing one salary. How does that happen?
It's very simple. There's a common practice in television when hiring writers. If you have a spot for a new writer, sometimes you'll go to 2 writers and say, hey, if you 2 new writers for your first job are willing to share a salary, you can both have the job. They have the opportunity to say, yes, that sounds good, or no, no thank you.
What Dan is talking about here has actually been part of the Writers Guild of America's pattern of demands to various degrees for years now, improving the conditions of inequity that exists within writers' rooms in Hollywood. As Deadline puts it back into 2017, when 2 writers working as a bona fide team write a 1-hour episode of a TV show, the contract states that together they may not be paid less than the guild minimum, $38,302. That's $19,151 each, which is a great deal for producers who get 2 writers for the price of 1. Now, I'm not really sure if the guild minimum is the same, but this, 2-for-1 deal, as it's called, hasn't really changed to my understanding. Part of the pattern of demands for the 2023 writers' strike actually addressed the bigger issue that this 2-for-1 deal creates, in that most employed writers didn't even reach the financial threshold to qualify for basic healthcare needs. Now, thankfully, this was changed by the strike, with Variety reporting that writers can now claim the full pay amount to qualify for relevant benefits. So, Why am I bringing all of this up? Because Dan is trying to justify a system that is controversial enough that writers have literally been fighting to amend it for years now. Because in Dan's eyes, it's perfectly okay for this inequity to exist in the first place. And even though Dan may not be directly responsible for this, and although Dan allegedly has nothing to do with assigning salaries, there's a wealth of evidence here and in quiet on set that Dan did indeed discriminate these women by their gender. I mean, allegedly, Dan literally once told Jenny that women aren't and can't be funny. Not only is that legitimately untrue, but I am proof that it's untrue. Yeah, could get it because I'm so funny. Like, yeah, you know, it's like, ooh, okay, yeah, you know, it's okay. Listen, I get it.
Now in the series, they also highlighted 2 black actors who said that they felt overlooked. Now, I want to be clear. I'm never going to speak on anyone else's journey. Yeah, I can talk about my experience, how my experience was with you, what I saw prior to working with you. But again, I don't want to speak on anyone's journey. I saw you be honored for diversity in your work.
Yes. And the reason for that is diversity has always been very important to me in my shows. If you go back to the very first Nickelodeon show I ever made.
This is really interesting to me. I'm going to interrupt it here because he's saying, okay, there were these 2 black actors, right? And then he says, I'm not going to speak, I'm talking about Boogie. He says, I'm not going to speak about their journey or anybody's journey. And then he doesn't ask a question about what the 2 black individuals had to say about their experience with Dan. Instead, he pulls up, you were given awards and accolades and praise and recognition for your diversity. Again, this is why I just feel like this is all planned. Instead of Dan bringing it up because he would look like an ass, he has the black man do it for him, and then Dan gets to soft brag about his accomplishments.
The second one, and then the first movie I ever made for Nickelodeon, which starred Kenan and Kel, and every show I did after that had a lead black actor in it. I'm very proud of that. It's very important to me.
Do you see the smile? This is not a real interview.
Important to me. And not only am I proud that they were in my shows, I'm exceptionally proud of the achievements they've had beyond my shows, and they've gone on to bigger and better things, and that gives me a great sense of pride.
Well, something that really kind of bothered me was how they depicted your relationship with the cast.
And there it is. They literally do not address the black individuals who came forward and spoke about their negative experience. They literally don't address it, but they make you think that they address it because Dan, I believe, has no answer or response to that. This was a whole bragging segment, and then they move on and never address what those black individuals were talking about. Do you see how that works? Just swept completely under the rug. Let's not even talk about the racism. And I'm not the only one who feels this way. Like Brian, his wife, recently tweeted responding directly to this part of the interview saying, quote, the way Dan Schneider just embodied the entire good Negro trope, pointing out the very few black leads in his other shows as examples of anti-racism is deplorable. He literally overlooked their experience whilst answering a question about them being overlooked. Watching this man portray classic signs of deflection, victimhood, and gaslighting is disappointing but not surprising. If we turn this interview into a drinking game of how many times Schneider threw someone else under the bus or embodied narcissistic traits, we'd all have alcohol poisoning.
Well, something that really kind of bothered me was how they depicted your relationship with the cast.
Yeah, it bothered me too.
Yeah, me 3.
Yeah, it bothered me too.
Yeah, just me being there, I knew the dynamic was trust. I understood that in situations where they may have had turmoil, whether it be with their families, whether it be other castmates, they came to you.
I'm sorry. Boogie literally, in the question before that never actually had a question, when he's talking about the black folks who had things to say, Boogie specifically says, I'm not going to speak to anyone else's journey.
Now, I want to be clear. I'm never going to speak on anyone else's journey.
But then what is the very next thing that he does?
Yeah, just me being there, I knew the dynamic was trust.
In 1 minute, Boogie says, I'm not going to speak to other people's journey. And then the very next minute, what does he do? He speaks to a whole massive amount of people's journey. I didn't like the way they framed everyone else's experience.
I understood that in situations where they may have had turmoil, whether it be with their families, whether it be other castmates, they came to you. Versus how they made you look.
I'm sorry, did I mention that this interview debuted on Dan's own YouTube channel? Like, I think I just want to remind everyone, this is Dan running damage control with a buddy and doing it shittily. I mean, it's awful. This is an awful interview, in my opinion. If you're a fan of it, then we agree to disagree. I respect your choice. In my opinion, this looks like what my cat vomited up earlier this morning, and I'm not even joking.
Amanda Bynes was brought up in the series and her emancipation and how you were involved in that. Can you talk to us about it a bit?
Sure. Amanda was between the ages of 16 and 17, and she wanted to get emancipated from her parents, which was a fairly common thing with successful young actors. So she turned to her team, which included her lawyer, her agent, her manager, her publicist, me, because she included me as part of her team, thought of me that way. We supported her. She was safe. I felt better. She ended up being taken to the police.
Well, regardless of what some people may think, I think it's only positive that you are there for people when they need you.
I just want to melt into my skin. Boogie, how much did you get paid for this? Dan literally couldn't have asked for a better hype man. That's what he looks like, a hype man. I hope it's worth it. Now, I want to transition really quickly to one of the more interesting dynamics at play in this Dan Schneider situation, Drake Bell. This next clip is kind of long because it's a lot to unpack.
Now, I want to make sure that we clear a couple of things up.
Okay?
Brian Peck was not hired by you.
No, I did not hire Brian Peck. And when Drake and I talked and he told me what had happened, I was more devastated by that than anything that ever happened to me in my career. And I told him, I'm here for you. What do you need? And next, I heard that he went to court, and when Drake walked in, he saw 50 people sitting on the side of the courtroom supporting Peck. A lot of them pretty famous. Of course, Drake was devastated that that happened. 41 of those people wrote letters for Peck, character letters, praising him for who he was and asking for leniency, and they knew that he was guilty. They knew he had confessed to some degree, and they still did this. I don't know if people know this, but Drake's mom, a lovely woman who I stay in contact with this day, she came to me at the time, and she said, Dan, I'm not good with words like you are, and would you help me with my speech for the judge? And I said, of course. And I did. And he ended up going to prison and serving his time. And yeah, that was probably the darkest part of my career. And here's the kicker that I really don't get.
Now, I want to stop there to point out really quick that Desert Dan doesn't appear to actually be crying any real tears. He is dry as a Desert Dan. He goes from that to like, but hey, here's the kicker, is incredibly bizarre to me. And I don't want to say for certain that Drought Man Dan doesn't feel bad for what happened to Drake, but all evidence currently points to this being something shot by Dan, edited by Dan, released by Dan, and coordinated by a Dan. So this, little bit staying in the interview is worth noting with that context, right?
But Drake's mom, a lovely woman who I stay in contact with this day, she came to me at the time and she said, Dan, I'm not good with words like you are.
He's got to let you know that he is still talking to this day to Drake's mother, and he manages to compliment himself before he then goes into spontaneous tears.
Would you help me with my speech for the judge? And I said, of course. And I did. And he ended up going to prison and serving his time.
The way that he strings all of this together, it makes it sound like Drake's mother came to him. I'm not good with words. And Dan uses his gift of gab. And by Dan using his words, the man goes to prison. It literally sounds like Dan is saying that I am the reason that this man goes to prison. Way to go, Savior Dan.
After he got out of prison and was, to my knowledge, a registered sex offender, he was hired on a Disney Channel show. I don't understand.
Yeah. I appreciate you sharing that, man. Are you okay? You want to take a minute?
Yeah, I'm all right. Let's keep going.
Yeah?
Yeah.
The audacity of Dan being granted any grace in the situation, considering everything he's up against is like legit unhinged. Sure, it's good to remember that Dan is a human too, and deserving of being treated like one to a degree. And allegations are allegations. They're alleged. They have not been right, yeah. But like, this is dippity-doo Dan, recounting good things Dan did, peppered with praise from Dustpan Dan about what a good writer Dan is and what a good friend to Drake Bell Dan was. Drake Bell did indeed go to bat for Dan to an extent in quiet on set. That's true. But that doesn't absolve Dan of the many things that he's accused of, a lot of which he admits to in this interview. It also doesn't absolve Dan of now passing the buck on to Disney, which, like, yes, of course it's bad that Disney hired a registered effing offender. The fact is, lest we forget, this didn't just happen once on your watch, Dan. This happened twice in 1 year with people you directly worked with. And then it happened again a year later with a Nickelodeon, though to grant you the tiniest bit of grace, that at least wasn't on your watch. You did hire Brian Peck Shore. He worked on 3 of your shows, including What I Like About You. I mean, did you notice when he was like bringing Drake directly to the show tapings and things? I don't...
Unpacked some important things. We set the record straight on a lot of things. Mm-hmm. Before I let you get out of here, I appreciate the vulnerability that you use in knowing that there's definitely things that you would have and should have done differently. Mm-hmm. Is there anything that we haven't discussed? Anything that if you could go back and navigate the journey differently, what would that look like?
Yeah, there's definitely things that I would do differently. One that I think would be really, really important is when you're hiring young actors, minors, to work in television, I would suggest that we have a licensed therapist there to oversee that process for the specific reason of making sure that those kids really wanted to do this job, that they really wanted to be on television. Yeah.
I'm not actually going to criticize Dan for this part. Mental health support is always important, but it is a shame that it takes him nearly 18 minutes to get to something that tries to resemble accountability for some of this.
All right. When I watched the show, I could see the hurt in some people's eyes, and it made me feel awful and regretful and sorry. Look, I wanted to make funny TV shows for kids, and we definitely did that. But if I could go back, I would get it done in different ways. I'd just be nicer as often as possible, and I would do everything that I could to make sure that everyone had a good experience.
This interview is just like, feels like a big virtue signal to me. That's what it is. It feels like an opportunity for Dan to virtue signal while calling it accountability, but really he brags about his achievements and like just like white knights himself at the end of this. Like he is the white savior, that too. The white knight, white savior of all of these poor little people who experienced the bad things at his own hand. And now he's here to save you with the mental health support and we need the therapist and we need and I'm just like, you're not the one, dude. You're not. But like, I don't know. If I'm still trying to just be fair here, as fair as I possibly can in a scenario where I just don't have any intent to be anything other than opinionated, I just like, I don't entirely doubt that he regrets being an a-hole, but like if this minute and a half were the whole apology, I think it would be a better start. It wouldn't address the countless other things that he's effed up with, but hey, it would be a start. Since Dan released this interview, reception has been pretty uniformly negative across the board. Dan knew this was going to happen. I think the video was released with its comments already disabled. Many of the former child stars featured in Quiet on Set and even a few other actors who have worked with Dan before have since responded. However, there is one response that dropped on March 20th, 2024 that truly shook things up even more from Zoe 101 actor Jack Salvatore.
Oh boy, what a week, y'all. Let's talk about it. My name is Jack. I was a child actor on Zoe 101, one of this guy's shows. I also worked in his production department as an intern on iCarly, and I worked in the writer's room on Salmon Cat and Victorious. This Max documentary that was recently released did a really good job of uncovering the details of workplace toxicity, specifically on Dan Schneider's shows for Nickelodeon. We could talk about the massages. We could talk about the fact that he would literally count his gold coin collection in front of his crew who was living paycheck to paycheck. We could talk about how sometimes he would bring out a shotgun to scare one of the writers when they were working at his house. We could talk about the high-level conversations I wasn't supposed to hear about how Nickelodeon didn't want to recommend antidepressants for Jeanette McCurdy after her mom died for fear that she might kill herself and make the network look bad.
That was less than a minute, and I think that Jack just opened the door to an entirely new world of Dan Schneider darkness. This man is a whole ass cartoon villain, y'all, like counting gold coins in front of underpaid writers who are probably sharing a salary. He's asking them to bend over and tell stories when they're just trying to do their jobs, and then threatening them with a shotgun, allegedly. But the truly darkest part dropped here with no additional context, which is the withholding of antidepressants from Jeanette McCurdy. Again, allegedly. This is something that we would need more context on, and although I'm glad Jack brought it up, we simply need a lot more to work with, and honestly, I would prefer Jeanette to have been the one to comment on that if she were comfortable in doing so.
What I do want to talk about is never letting this stuff happen again. This is an entire industry built on hope and dreams and adrenaline and wish fulfillment. And that can be a very dangerous thing for megalomaniacs to wield. Even in posting this, I'm a little afraid. Is this going to screw up my career moving forward? I have no idea, but I think it's important and it needs to be said. Because if my silence ensures the perpetuation of environments I don't want to work in anymore, then what is the point of working in them? And until Homeboy goes on 60 Minutes to answer some questions from some real journalists and not a cast member of his who he's paying to be there, apology not accepted.
Okay, Susperians, time to step out of the cesspool, grab a towel, and dry off. That's what I got. I have a brand new full deep dive Swoop documentary on the tragic story of Amanda Bynes and much more about Dan Schneider. Highly recommend that you check that out. It will be linked in the description and in the pinned comment. It is available right now to watch.
The jail?
No.
No jail?
No, not yet.
Rehab?
No.
No rehab. Amanda Bynes, what kind of a starlet are you?
I know, what's wrong with me? Bizarre behavior from former child star Amanda Bynes.
In a series of bizarre tweets over the weekend following her arrest.
Amanda, how was it?
You have to delete that one in my face.
Girl with her pant leg on fire and a gas can trailing fire through the driveway.
Today I want to talk about a controversial topic. My conservatorship case.
The executive producer of the main show, Dan Schneider.
Thanks for coming for a swim. Make sure to subscribe to this new channel. Also follow me on Instagram and TikTok, linked below. That's where I post most often and also announce opportunities to have your thoughts featured in my documentaries. Also, a huge thank you to our sponsor for supporting this channel, and of course, a big thank you to all of you. Without you, who am I? This is not a thing, so thank you for being here. Join me on your self-care fragrance journey and recapture the memories and create some new ones that make you feel your best with Scentbird, and use code PETTY for 55% off and treat yourself, honey. You deserve it. And I'm gonna end this actually with a couple of questions. Leave me your thoughts in the comments. What do you think about the Drake Bell of it all? Do you think Dan Schneider is truly sorry? And what do you think should happen with Nickelodeon moving forward? All right, y'all, have a good day out there. Stay weird, and I will see you next time in the cesspool. Swoop!